Well, there has been yet another devastating attack against the South Sudanese Defense Forces by the SPLA-IO in Western Equatoria State. Now, a video before this one, in my previous video, I reported about yet another attack that happened in Western Equatoria State, where a coalition of the National Salvation Front and the SPLA-IO waged an attack against a base of the South Sudanese Defense Forces in Mundri East County. Now, in this particular event, the South Sudanese Defense Forces base in Nagero was attacked by the SPLA-IO. Now, in this video, I'm going to tell you about that particular attack that happened on the 28th of September 2025 on a Sunday morning, as well as we are going to ask the question, who exactly is calling the shots? Because we are getting conflicting statements from the opposition. The opposition forces are waging an attack against the government forces, while at the same time, the opposition leader has accepted to go through the legal proceedings. And what exactly are these checkpoints that are causing mayhem and clashes in different parts of the country? Are these forces fighting because of checkpoints, or are they fighting because of Riek Machar? Well, this is bona fide. If you haven't subscribed, kindly subscribe and hit that notification button so that when I release something new on South Sudan, you get notified as soon as possible. Well, call it what you may. There has been an increase of clashes in South Sudan. The opposition forces have increased their attacks against the government forces in different parts of the country. It has been reported that the forces from the Sudan's People Liberation Army in opposition, SPLA-IO, attacked a military barracks in Nagero County in Western Equatoria early Sunday, injuring one government soldier and prompting civilians to flee the area. Further, the assault took place at around 5:30 a.m., according to local officials. The South Sudanese Defense Forces, however, repelled the attack and retained control of that barracks. Well, this has not been an isolated case recently. We've heard about several instances where the opposition forces have pitted against the government forces, and all this came up after the arrest of the first vice president and other top leaders of the opposition. But the question remains, why are the forces still fighting even after Riek Machar has agreed that he will go through the court proceedings, that he will not seek an armed struggle against the government this time? He has said that he will openly go to the courts, and we've seen Riek Machar in court. So why are the opposition forces in different parts of the country still waging these fierce clashes against the government officials? And mind you, we have heard about loss of lives because of these clashes that are still ongoing in some parts of Western Equatoria as well as some parts of Upper Nile. So the biggest questions have always been command and control lines. Who exactly is calling the shots on this? Because it is real that the opposition forces are waging a war against the government forces. This is seen in different parts. The civilians have been fleeing. In fact, in this particular case, on today's attack against the Nagero base, the county executive director said that the situation has now calm, but people remain fearful and movement is restricted. Several sources mentioned that people fled to the nearby bushes because of the attack that happened just early morning Sunday from the opposition forces against the government forces. There have been several events where even the civilians have lost their lives because of these attacks from the government forces to the opposition, or the opposition to the government forces. So why exactly are these two sides fighting right now, even despite the fact that the opposition came out and released a statement saying that we are going to follow the rule of law and our leader is going to appear in court to answer the cases of murder and crimes against humanity? Well, to get a grasp of what exactly is happening and why some of these clashes are happening right now, it is important to note that the government came up with a raft of measures after the incarceration of the first vice president. And one particular measure angered the opposition, and this measure was the removal of checkpoints. Now, what are these checkpoints? These checkpoints were roadblocks along major highways in different parts of the country where authorities were checking the vehicles that were coming in or going out in different territories in South Sudan. And specifically, the opposition forces manned different checkpoints where their strongholds lied. And these checkpoints acted as sources of revenue where vehicles were required to pay taxes. They were control points where they could monitor movements and assert authority and show presence in control areas. Further, these checkpoints helped the opposition forces to track the government forces, the SSPDF movements, and make it harder for the government troops to advance without being detected. Therefore, these checkpoints were very, very critical, not only logistically to the opposition forces, they were also very critical in terms of revenue generation for the opposition forces in South Sudan. And these checkpoints, the policy of having these checkpoints was then reverted by the government of the day, that there will be no checkpoints across South Sudan. And the government did not just say this in words, they put it into deed by the government forces going to different checkpoints and removing these checkpoints. Now, the government of South Sudan, in its own defense, say that it needed to remove these checkpoints because they were illegal, that security mechanisms were to be joined, that is, between the South Sudanese Defense Forces and the SPLM-IO or the SPLA-IO. They were to do joint security measures under the revitalized agreement, and that manning of these checkpoints was not inclusive of the government, and that is why the government wanted to remove these checkpoints so that all could be equal. Now, the removal of these checkpoints was a constant flashpoint, and it often led to clashes when the South Sudanese Defense Forces tried to dismantle the said checkpoints. And mind you, one of the areas where these checkpoints were very active were in Nagero, where there has been that attack by the opposition forces against the government forces, even though the government forces repelled that attack and continued to man that particular barracks. Now, the opposition forces are not a solid, homogeneous force because these forces are scattered in different parts of South Sudan, and they are led by their generals in different parts of the country. And sometimes these generals have very high say of their troops in these particular contingents in different parts of the country. Now, the main question is whether these calls to attack are coming from high above. Are they coming from the leadership, the general leadership of the opposition? Are they coming from Riek Machar's group? Or these particular attacks are coming from their generals in different parts of the country? Now, that has been the same accusation that the South Sudanese Defense Forces or the government has been laying on the opposition. They've been accusing of the opposition leadership not restraining their forces. And on the other hand, the opposition leadership has been pointing their fingers at the government, saying that you are the ones who are initiating these clashes in different parts of the country by, one, removing the checkpoints and aggressing the opposition forces in different contingents and cantonments where they are existing. Therefore, it has been a blame game between the opposition forces and the government forces. But the main question is, are these opposition forces really the ones who are calling the shots, or there are generals or leaders that are calling these shots that are making these forces to clash against each other? Further, there are militias who are aligned to the opposition. The question remains the same. Are these militias taking their authority from high above in the opposition ranks, or these militias are acting on their own and conducting the operations on their own? Because the first vice president is behind bars right now because of the fact that there was an attack in Nasir, Upper Nile, of that UN helicopter. And that attack is said to have been done by the White Army. That is a militia that is existing in Upper Nile. Now, the opposition forces are saying that, yes, this attack happened, but how sure are you that this attack or this order came from Riek Machar? And the government forces have been saying that you are the one who is in charge of everything that is happening in the opposition. You are the one who is not calling your boys to order. Now, that is the question that begs, even as the first Vice President Riek Machar will be going back to court this coming week to answer the charges of crimes against humanity as well as murder. Well, I will keep you informed of the latest of what will come out from that court proceedings, as well as the attacks that keep happening against the South Sudanese Defense Forces in different parts of South Sudan. Keep it bona fide.